Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We will spend the rest of the hour remembering the life and legacy of the poet, playwright, and political organizer Amiri Baraka. He died on Thursday in Newark, New Jersey at the age of 79. Baraka was a leading force in the black arts movement of the 1960s and 1970s, but he first came to prominence as a Beat Generation poet when he co-founded the journal Eugen and published the works of Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and Gregory Corso. At the time, he was known as Leroy Jones. In 1963, he published Blues People, Negro Music in White America. The book has been called the first major history of black music to be written by an African American. A year later, he published a collection of poetry titled The Dead Lecturer and won an Obie Award for his play, Dutchman.
Dutchman was the last play he published under his birth name, Leroy Jones. After the assassination of Malcolm X in 1965, he moved to Harlem and founded the Black Arts Repertory Theater. He soon became a leader of what was known as the Black Arts Movement. In 2007, he appeared on Democracy Now! And talked about his name change.
I was Everett Leroy Jones. My grandfather's name was Everett. He was a politician in that town. My family came to Newark in the 20s. We've been there a long, long time. My father's name was Leroy. You know, the Frenchified aspect of it, because his first name was Coyette. You see, they come from South Carolina. You see, I changed my name when we became aware of the African Revolution and the whole question of our African roots. I was named by the man who buried Malcolm X, Hisham Jabber, who died last week. He named me Amir Barakat, but that's Arabic. I brought it down into Swahili land, into Tanzania, which is an accent. So it's Amiri instead of Amir, and, you know, Baraka rather than Barakat, you know, which is interesting. If it was Amir Barakat, I'd probably have more difficulty flying these days.
In the late 1960s, Amiri Baraka moved back to his hometown of Newark and began focusing more on political organizing. In 1967, he was nearly beaten to death by police during the urban uprising in Newark. The FBI once identified Baraka as, quote, the person who will probably emerge as the leader of the Pan-African movement in the United States. 3 years later, in 1970, he formed the Congress of African People and spoke at the Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. 2 years later, Amiri Baraka continued writing and performing poetry up until he was hospitalized late last year. In 2002, he was named Poet Laureate of New Jersey, a post that that was eliminated after a poem he wrote about the September 11th attacks turned out to create a firestorm throughout the country and the state.
Amiri Baraka's work also greatly influenced a younger generation of hip-hop artists and slam poets. In a moment, we'll be joined by 4 guests to talk more about Amiri's life and legacy. But first, let's turn to a performance of his on the program Def Jam Poetry on HBO.
This is an excerpt from a poem called Why Is We Americans? But reality is an excerpt on television. Why is we Americans? Why is we Americans? Boodee-da, 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 boodoo-da, be-dee-dee-dee, boodee-boodee, boo-boo-boo. What I want is me, for real. I want me and myself, and what that is what I be and what I see and feel, and who is me and the what it is and who it is, and when it me is what it be. I'm going to be here if I want, like I said, self-determination. But I ain't come from a foolish tribe. We wants the mule, the land. You can make it 300 years of blue chip stock in the entire operation. We want to be paid in a central bank, the average worker farmer wage for all those years we gave it free. Plus we want damages for all the killings and the fraud, the lynchings, the missing justice, the lies and frame-ups, the unwarranted jailings, the tar and featherings, the character and race assassinations, historical slander, ugly caricatures. For every Sambo, step and fetch it flick, we want to be paid. For every hurtful thing thing you did or said, for all the land you took, for all the rapes, all the Rosewoods and Black Wall Street you destroyed, all the miseducation, jobs lost, segregated shacks we lived in, the disease that ate and killed us, for all the mad police that drilled us, for all the music and dances you stole, the styles, the language, the hip clothes you copped, the careers you stopped. All these are suits, specific litigation as represent we, be like we, for reparations for damages paid to the Afro-American nation. Boudida, boudida, boudida. We want education for all of us and anyone else in the black belt hurt by slavery, for all the native peoples, even them poor white people you show all the time is funny, all them Abners and Daisy Mays, them Beverly Hillbillies who never got to know Beverly Hills, who never got to Harvard on their grandfather's wills. We want reparations for them, right on, for the Mexicans whose land you stole, for all of North Mexico, you call it Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico, Colorado, all that, all that, all that, all that. Be-dee-da, doo-doo, bap, 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 doo-dee-doo. All that you got to give up. Autonomy and reparations to the Chicanos and the Native Americans whose soul you ripped out with their land. Give self-determination, regional autonomy. That's what Maui is asking, and they're going to do the same when they demand it like us again in their own exploited name. Yeah, the education, that's right. 200 years. We want a central stash, a central bank with democratically elected trustees and a board elected by us all to map out from the referendum we set up what we want to spend it on to build that Malcolm sense self-determination as self-reliance and self-respect and self-defense, the will of what the good Dr. Du Bois beat on, true self-consciousness, simply the psychology of freedom, boudida, boudida, bidida, boudida, that ba ba ba, boudi boudi boo boo boo. Then we can talk about being American. Then we can listen. Then we can listen without the undercurrent of desire to first set your on fire. We will only talk of voluntary unity, of autonomy as vective arms of self-determination if there is democracy in you. That is where it will be shown. This is the only way we as Americans, this is the only truth that can be told. Otherwise, there is no future between us but war, and we as rather lovers and singers and dancers and poets and drummers and actors and runners and elegant heartbeats of the sun's flame. But we is also at the end of our silence and sit down. We is at the end of being under your ignorant smell, your intentional hell. Either give us our lives or plan to forfeit your own.
Amiri Baraka, performing his poem, Why Is We Americans, on the HBO series Deaf Poetry Jam. Amiri Baraka died Thursday. He was 79 years old. In a moment, we'll be joined by four guests, by fellow poet Sonia Sanchez, Felipe Luciano, the former chair of the Young Lords, as well as Newark community organizer Larry Hamm and historian Kamosi Woodard, author of A Nation Within a Nation, Amiri Baraka and Black Power Politics. Stay with us.
Whalers are we. We are whalers. Don't get scared. Nothing happening but out and way out. Nothing happening but the positive unless you the negative. Whalers, we whalers, yeah, whale, yeah, whalers. We whale, we whale. We could dig Melville on his ship, confronting the huge white mad beast, speeding death across the sea to we. But we whalers, we can kill whales. We can get on top of a whale and whale. Whalers, undersea defense hot folk. Blues babies humming when we arrive. Boogie ladies strumming our black violet souls. Rag daddies come from the land of never say die. Reggae workers bringing the funk to the people of I. We whalers, all right. Hail to you, Bob man. We will ask your question all our lives. Could you be loved? I understand. We see the world. Eyes and eyes say yes to transformation. Whalers, whalers. subterranean night-color magi's, working inside the soul of the world.
Amiri Baraka reading his poem Wailers with David Murray on saxophone, the poem dedicated to Bob Marley and Larry Neal. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We're spending the hour remembering the life and legacy of the poet, playwright, and political organizer Amiri Baraka. He died on Thursday in Newark, New Jersey at the age of 79. Baraka was a leading force in the black arts movement of the 1960s and 1970s. To talk more about Amiri Baraka's legacy, we're joined by four guests in Philadelphia. There's Sonia Sanchez. She joins us. She's a renowned writer, poet, and playwright, activist, and one of the foremost leaders of the Black Studies movement. She's the author of over a dozen books, including Morning Haiku, Shake Loose My Skin, and Homegirls and Hand Grenades. Sanchez is a poet laureate of Philadelphia and a longtime friend and colleague of Amiri Baraka. And here in New York, we're joined by three people. Felipe Luciano, my longtime comrade, poet, activist, journalist, and writer. He knew Amiri Baraka for 43 years, a former chairman of the Young Lords, and was an original member of the poetry and musical group The Last Poets. Kamosi Woodard is a professor of history at Sarah Lawrence College. He's the author of A Nation Within a Nation, Amiri Baraka and Black Power Politics. And Larry Ham is with us, chairman of the People's Organization for Progress. He was named at HIMU by Amiri Baraka. I want to start with Sonia Sanchez. Your reaction to the news of Amiri Baraka's death.
Good morning to you, my dear brother, and the rest of the brothers and Sister Amy. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Very well, Sonia.
Yeah, it is good hearing all of you. My dear brother Juan, like everyone else, we were more than shocked because we always could never imagine ourselves on this earth without dear brother Amiri and his family. Every time you started out during the day, you would say hello to him and his family in Newark. You would say hello to all those brothers and sisters who were part of what I call that magnificent generation of the 60s. These men and women who proceeded to change the world. They came out and they decided very much to change the world. And so when I heard from Sister Amina in Newark, when she called and told us he had made transition, you know, your first response is vete y no vete, you know, to have seen you and to see you no more. But then after you say that, and after you move and go outside and walk 12 blocks, you come back and realize simply that he lives. He lives. He will always live. He will always live in the hearts of all of us, in the hearts of young people and young poets and people who have some kind of moral grounding, because this man moved in such a large way to effect change in this place called America and in the world.
Kamosi Woodard, you wrote a biography of Amiri Baraka. You're a professor of history at Sarah Lawrence College. The title of your book, A Nation Within a Nation, Amiri Baraka and Black Power Politics. Give us a thumbnail sketch of Amiri's life.
Well, he was born in Newark, New Jersey during the Great Depression in 1934. Leroy Jones, kind of named after his father. And he went to Howard University, where he met Toni Morrison, Andy Young, and people like that generation. He dropped out of, you know, people think he graduated from Howard, but he dropped out in his last semester of his senior year, and he joined, in disgrace, he joined the Air Force. And he got kicked out of the Air Force. And then he became, he joined the Beat Poets down in Greenwich Village, where he began to, it's kind of phenomenal, he became an editor of the Beat Poetry. He just took it upon himself, that he took that agency, that he could take all the great poets and begin to collect that new American poetry. He went to Cuba in 1960 at the invitation of Fidel Castro, with a delegation of black writers. He met Robert Williams there, who was a famous NAACP activist for self-defense. When he got back, he hooked up with Malcolm X. There's a famous meeting late January 1965 between Malcolm X, Abdul Rahman Babu, and Amiri Baraka that lasted all night, where they discussed the international strategy for black liberation. Malcolm X is killed a few weeks later. Baraka leaves Greenwich Village and goes to Harlem to found the Black Arts Repertory Theater School, 1965. Jazz musicians held a concert to raise the money for that new school and theater. Baraka had already written Blues People, which is an important work for him because I think he found his poetic voice by studying the blues. And the rest is history. You know, he formed many Black Power organizations. At his 75th birthday celebration, he and Sonia celebrated their 75th birthday a few years ago, and there were perhaps 1,000 artists and actors there. And it occurred to me in the middle of that celebration that all of those people were his former students. So I think like his mentor Sterling Brown was asked, what is your greatest work? Brown said, my students. And I think Baraka would say the same thing.
And Felipe, you were one of those students. You met him in that period of the Black Arts Movement. You yourself were a member of the Last Poets. Talk about first meeting Amiri and his influence on your life.
1967, we had started a group called the Last Poets, and it was Galen Kane, Abiodun Oyewole, and David Nelson, and they introduced me. It was the first Black and Puerto Rican aggregation. It had not happened before. And I met him with an enormous amount of trepidation. He started the Black Arts Movement, as our esteemed professor said, and we followed in that tradition 4 years later. And immediately he embraced me. Amiri was the only Black intellectual that I've met who was able to bring together militancy with intellect. Militancy, aggressive action with scholarship. He was an incredibly learned man. He could quote Tennyson, Yeats, Wadsworth, Walt Whitman. He knew Ginsberg, introduced me to Allen Ginsberg. I feel, so I was in awe. He always told me it's important to read and write and read. And he said that what is the use, this is the first thing he told me, what is the use of being ethereal and being escapist and romantic? Take the words and make them into bullets. Take the words and make them do something. In fact, it was his poetry, his motivation, that led me from the Last Poets into the Young Lords.
Speaking of poetry, I'd like, before we go to Adimu, as we're sort of chronologically the people who met him through their lives, all of you, and most have known him for over 40 years. Adimu, your name is Adimu because of Amiri. But Kamosi Woodard, would you set up this poem for us? Amiri Baraka reading the poem, It's Nation Time. This is 1970. It's right before Adimu, you met him, at the founding conference of the Congress of African People. Now, a warning, the N-word is repeated numerous times during this reading. Give us context.
Well, we were in a political campaign in 1970 to elect the first Black mayor of Newark, and the workload was heavy. One person late at night said, what time is it? As if they wanted to go home and quit the detail. And an old man named Baba Mshuri said, it's nation time. Baraka heard this story, and as he did with many of his poems, that story turned into this epic poem.
It's Nation Time. Amiri Baraka.
Come out, niggas, come out. Help us stop the devil. Help us build a new world, niggas. Come out, brothers. Are we with you and your sons, your daughters are ours? And we are the same, all the blackness from one black Allah. When the world is clear, you'll be with us. Come out, niggas, come out. Come out, niggas, come out. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. Chant with bells and drummers. Nation time. It's nation time. Get up, Santa Claus. Get up, Roy Wilkins. Get up, Dinah Ross. Get up, Jimmy Brown. It's nation time. Build it. Get up, Muppet Bagger. Get up, now. It's for real. Come Master Ferrari. Last tour. Get up, nigga. Get up, nigga. Come over here, nigga.
That was Amiri Baraka reading his poem, It's Nation Time, in 1970 in Atlanta. In fact, that was the year, Larry Ham, that you first met Amiri Baraka. Where?
Yes, Amiri Baraka came and spoke at my school, Arts High School, in 1970.
That was where?
That was in Newark, New Jersey. That was our first encounter, but our actual first meeting was in August of 1971. I had been appointed to the Newark Board of Education at the age of 17.
You were the youngest person ever.
Youngest school board member in the country. I wasn't even old enough to vote yet, but I was appointed by Mayor Gibson, whose election as the first African-American mayor of Newark was in part made possible by Amiri Baraka. So our first meeting was in August of 1971. And then you mentioned my name, Adimu Chunga. He gave me that name. I requested an African name after being a delegate to the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana in March of 1972. I came out of the ghetto off of 12th Street, off of Ridgewood Avenue, and going to the National Black Political Convention in Gary was an epiphany for me. It was my revolutionary transformation. And then after that, I asked Baraka for an African name, and he gave me the name Adimu Chunga in 1972, in March of 1972. Amiri Baraka, I believe, was a great American revolutionary. And whatever desire I have in me for revolutionary social transformation comes from him.
Well, you mentioned meeting him in Newark, and I want to talk about Newark, to turn to another clip of Amiri Baraka. He appeared on Democracy Now! In 2007 on the 40th anniversary of the Newark Rebellion. And I asked him to talk about why the uprising began.
You have to start with slavery, because those abuses have never been eradicated. You know, people are not living in slums because they voted to. You know, their children not in jail because they wanted them to. You know, these are the results of a people who've been oppressed and suffer national oppression, you know. And so in a city like Newark, which is the third oldest city in the United States, by the way, where all these kind of abuses sort of converge, you know, and the racism on top of that, you know. I mean, one absurd example is one time I was directing a play, and the police rushed into the loft, and the man actually took the script out of my hand, you know, as if it was some kind of a volatile weapon, you know. So that day we had been picketing because they had beaten up a black cab driver, a guy named John Smith. And so people gathered at that precinct, and then that was very explosive that night. That was the night before. That was, say, the 11th. So the next day we were picketing that precinct because that's where it happened. And that was the day. By the time the sun started going down, that's when it broke out.
Now, we saw a clip of Mayor Adonisio, but could you talk a little bit about the political climate, the mayor's regime, as well as Anthony Imperiale was running around then in those days, and what was the climate that the majority population, the black community in Newark, was feeling?
Well, see, first of all, when you say Adonisio, who was indicted, and you know what was it? He was given 1% of the city's budget to the mob.
He was the mayor.
He was the mayor, Adonisio, No Neck Adonisio, and his Spina, okay, was it was interesting that Spina, who was the police chief, when they beat me up, they didn't take me to prison or they took me to Spina's office, you know, and threw me on the floor, and he says, you know, just like right out of the movies, they got you, you know, and I said, but I ain't dead.
He was head of police?
Yeah, he was the police chief, you know.
And they brought you to his
office, not to jail. Mm-hmm. But since I had given my given name, Everett L. Jones, laborer, you know, then they could deny until my wife got hold of Allen Ginsberg, and he got hold of Jean-Paul Sartre, and Sartre called the police station.
From France?
Yeah, called the police station. Sartre and Ginsberg and those people started, you know. And then the only reason I got my life saved is the people in the apartment building where they were beating me start throwing things out of the window at them. Otherwise, I would be gone, you know. Mm. But it was a very, the racism that existed
By
there.
then you were already a very well-known poet and published author.
And harassing them, you know, in that town. See, the town's too small for you to be doing something. I mean, they actually have policemen stop a poetry reading. I mean, that's how wild it was getting. They would ride up and down the street and make remarks at my wife and the other ladies in that block, calling them all kinds of slurs. I mean, this was a daily, a nightly thing. And so it became like, you know, back and forth, you know. And finally, it just erupted. We were trying to do things. We were putting out literature suggesting that we could have a mayor. We could have a city council. You know, that's Stokely had come out with Black Power, and I was not staple, what do you call it, spray paint Black Power in all these buildings in the city, you know. So they knew who it was. And once I got arrested, they ran in my house to destroy all of the leaflets and stuff that we were, but my wife was smart enough to get that stuff out of there and move it to somebody else's house down the street. But they destroyed our mimeograph machines and stuff like that. They destroyed my car, you know. I mean, it was, you know, search and destroy mission because they knew who it was, you know, in that little context. But the whole city, you know, as Harper's Magazine said, the worst city in the United States was Newark. 18,000 people density in 1 square mile, you know, talking about the project. So it was a city that was always on the verge, you know.
That was Amiri Baraka in an interview in 2007. Felipe, even in those days in Newark, there was a significant Puerto Rican Latino community and budding unity and cooperation between the two communities. Could you talk about that relationship and Amiri's stance as at that time, a black nationalist reaching out to create a broader front of people who were suffering discrimination and oppression?
His evolution amazed me. He went from beat poetry to cultural nationalism to revolutionary nationalism to socialism and then to communism. He calls me one day and he says, why don't you come over? I had been working with him at the Committee for Unified Newark, where we were trying to get Ken Gibson elected. The first black mayor of Newark. And I was working with him assiduously. We were working with him, working within the Puerto Rican community, the black community. And when we started the Lord's one, he said, we sat together one night, he said, why don't we start a mutual defense pact? I said, Amiri, are you serious? He said, why not? I said, it's difficult enough dealing with black folk within Newark, because Newark was up south, as we called it. It was like Baltimore. He said, let's try to put together a black and Puerto Rican pact. And believe it or not, it was the first mutual defense pact between African Americans and Puerto Ricans. His evolution, his foresight was astounding. He loved Latino culture. To see him and Amina dance mambo, I mean, was a trip. He embraced Pedro Pietri. He embraced Miguel Piñero. He embraced Victor Hernandez Cruz. He embraced every we as New York poets, the post-colonial, modern, the new urban negritude movement was in fact started by Amiri Baraka and the Black Arts Movement in 1964.
And it's also important to add along those lines that Mayor Gibson was elected because Amiri Baraka and the Committee for Unified Newark organized the Black and Puerto Rican Convention, and that took place at what is today University High School, then was Clinton Place Junior High School. That alliance, Gibson was not elected just by the black vote in Newark.
No, it was Puerto Rican.
That's right. It
Along
was
with Ramon Rivera.
That's right, an alliance between African Americans and Puerto Ricans. And this continued. It wasn't just, you mentioned Ramon Rivera, who continued to be an activist in Newark during those days. He and Amiri had a very close relationship.
Yes, they did.
Kamosi Woodard, Maya Angelou called Amiri Baraka the greatest living poet. Talk about that and his relationship with her, with Toni Morrison, and we're going to go to break and then come back to Sonia Sanchez.
Well, Baraka was a poet, and Maya Angelou and Abby Lincoln called a demonstration to protest the death of Lumumba at the United Nations. And Baraka got arrested. Like many other people, the police were beating people up. And so he got arrested. And in jail, he realized that Oscar Muhammad Touré and the other people he was demonstrating with were poets. So his politics and his poetry kind of ran together. But they were just experimenting with poetry. And he had I think Blues People was him finding his poetic voice. If you listen to his poetry before Blues People and after Blues People, you kind of hear that blues ethos and jazz aesthetic. And much of it he got from Langston Hughes.
We have this great picture of Maya Angelou and Amiri Baraka dancing.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back to this discussion. We're talking about the life and legacy of Amiri Baraka. He died yesterday on Thursday at the age of 79, a founder of the Black Arts Movement, a poet, an activist, an organizer, being hailed in this country and around the world. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
Beautiful black women fail, they act. Stop them raining. They are so beautiful, we want them with us. Stop them raining. Beautiful, stop raining. They fail. We fail them, and their lips stick out perpetually at our weakness. Raining, stop them. Black queens. Ruby D weeps at the window, raining, being lost in her life, being what we all will be, sentimental, bitter, frustrated, deprived of her fullest life. Beautiful black women, it is still raining in this terrible land. We need you. We flex our muscles, turn to stare at our tormentor. We need you. Raining. We need you raining.
Beautiful Black Women by Amiri Baraka. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, as we remember Amiri Baraka. He died in Newark, surrounded by family, yesterday, on Thursday. He was 79 years old, the poet, the activist, the organizer. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
In December of 1987, Amiri Baraka delivered a eulogy at James Baldwin's funeral. Let's listen to a clip.
And it is he, this Jimmy of whom I will continue to speak. It is this Jimmy, this glorious, elegant griot of our oppressed African-American nation who I am eulogizing. So let the butchering copy editors of our captivity stay for an eternal moment their dead eraser fingers from our celebration. There will be and should be reams and reams of analysis, even praise for our friend, but also even larger measures of non-analysis and certainly condemnation for James Baldwin, the Negro writer. Alas, we have not yet the power to render completely sterile or make impossible the errors and lies which will merely be America being itself rather than its unconvincing promise. But the wide gap, the world-spanning abyss between the James Baldwin of yellow journalism and English departments, and here we thought this was America, and the Jimmy Baldwin of our real lives is stunning. When he told us nobody knows he meant our name, he was trying to get you ready for it even then. For one thing, no matter the piles of deathly prose, citing influences, relationships, metaphor, and criticisms that will attempt to tell us about our older brother, most will miss the mark simply because for the most part they will be retelling old lies or making up new ones or shaping yet another black life to fit the great white stomach which yet rules and tries to digest the world.
That was Amiri Baraka in December 1987, remembering the great essayist, novelist, playwright, poet, social critic James Baldwin. And this was played on Gil Noble's show, Like It Is, talking about the greats that we have lost over time. Today we are remembering Amiri Baraka because he died yesterday at 79 years old. And our guests are Dimuchunga Larry Ham. He's the chair of the People's Organization for Progress. Kamosi Woodard is a professor of history at Sarah Lawrence College and wrote a book, a biography about Amiri Baraka called A Nation Within a Nation, Amiri Baraka and Black Power Politics. We're also joined by Felipe Luciano, who was in some ways politically raised by Amiri Baraka, poet, activist, journalist, writer, co-founder of the Young Lords. And in Philadelphia, out of sight but not out of mind, is Sonia Sanchez. We're all in New York City. She's in the studio alone but not alone in Philadelphia. Sonia, the great poet, renowned writer, playwright, and activist, dear friend and colleague of Amiri Baraka. As you listen to his poetry, talk more about your relationship with him and his effect on your work and the work of so many in this country and around the world. What most influenced him?
Well, I'm glad you played that speech that he gave, that eulogy for Brother Jimmy, because in that eulogy, Baraka called Baldwin God's black revolutionary mouth. And, you know, our dear brother Baraka was indeed also God's black revolutionary mouth, if we understand that. He also said in that eulogy that Jimmy Baldwin was not only a writer, an international literary figure, but he was also man, spirit, voice, and black, and terrible in as that first ancestor. And all of that is our dear brother. You know, Sister Toni Morrison, you mentioned her, and Sister Maya said, we die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. And the measure of our dear brother's life was the language that he did, you know how he took that language, how he crossed the cities and countries, and how he helped us document our bones, how he stood tall as lightning, heard the trumpeters, tears of death called segregation and racism and colonialism and greed, how his tongue caught fire at all of those things, and he moved us all away from the graveyards here in this place called America. His poems exploded from clouds, I say, and intestines, and he embroidered his tongue with pyramids. Can you hear me?
We hear you perfectly. You write a haiku every morning just to wake yourself up. Can you share it with us?
The one that I wrote for him, my dear sister, is your words carry the spirit of creation. I say your words carry the spirit of creation. Isn't that so, my dear sister and my dear brothers? I mean, his words carry the spirit of creation. You know, he sewed himself into the sleeves of history and change, and he turned around and said, come on, hey, come on, keep up with me. I got some words. I'm saying some words. You got to learn from these words. You got to come out here and do this thing called language, do this thing called freedom, do this thing called change. And we listened and we smiled and we did this thing called change with that dear brother and with all the brothers sitting in the studio also, too.
Amiri Baraka was almost killed by the police in 1967. Kamosi Woodard, can you talk about what happened? And then what is known by some who call the Newark riots, others who talk about them as the Newark Rebellion, which is certainly how Amiri described it. But what happened to him?
Well, he was nearly beaten to death by the police. They pulled him out of his van and several other people and began, I guess they knew who he was. So they surrounded him and beat him. One black cop stood on the side and assumed that they were going to beat him to death. And apparently the people from the community saw what was going on and began to throw litter and bottles at the police. And they had to take him to the jail, and then they lost him, as he said. And Sartre helped them find him. So it took Paris to find him. Yeah, but Baraka is interesting. One of the people who saved his life was this wino named Rabbit. So one day Rabbit walked into our headquarters and I said, where's this wino coming into the thing there? And he said, where's Leroy? And I said, this is crazy. What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
Where's Leroy? We had the Committee for Unified Newark at the time in Newark. I'm sorry. And Baraka comes down in his suit and talks to the wino for about 5 minutes. It gave him $5. So I said, what's going on here? And everyone said, that's the guy who saved his life. He was the one that testified at the trial and said that he was beaten by the police and what happened. So he knew. Baraka had 1,000 different faces, and he knew all kinds of people. And that was one of his lessons to us, I think, was to treat everyone equally and the same.
I just want to add that Amiri Baraka was the first one that I heard call the Newark riots a rebellion and place those riots in the context of the black freedom struggle. That it was not simply a riot, a momentary occurrence that could easily be put down by a handful of police. Newark had a police force at that time of close to 1,500. They couldn't stop it. They brought in 700 state troopers. They couldn't stop it. They brought in, 3,000 National Guard. 1,500 people were wounded. 27 or more people were killed. And it was Baraka who helped me to understand that this was part of black people's struggle for liberation, that it was more than simply a riot, that it was part of a continuum of collective struggle in this country.
Well, the interesting thing, it seems to me, about him is that he was constantly pushing the edges of of political thought in the African American as well as the mainstream community. I remember back in 1984 as a reporter covering the Democratic National Convention, and by that time, of course, Amiri had moved much more in a radical direction and much more to socialism and Marxism. And there was Amiri in the hotel room in San Francisco, essentially holding court as one after another establishment black political figure came up to meet with him. Obviously, he was not part of the Democratic Party, but they all felt the need to discuss and talk with him about what they were doing within the convention. And but could you talk about, as he turned more from revolutionary nationalism into Marxism, how he was, how other leaders in the black community responded to him?
Well, first of all, it's important for people to understand that Baraka did not make this change suddenly. First and foremost, Baraka pointed young people like me to Africa and to African leaders, revolutionary leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, like Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau, like Samora Machel in Mozambique, like Mwalimu Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. You cannot read these people and not eventually move to the left, because many of them either call themselves socialists, Marxists, or Marxist-Leninists. So Baraka and the Member Committee for Unified Newark, members of the Congress of African People, were studying these people. So for me, from an intellectual point of view, it's almost inevitable that they would move in that direction. And early on, I can remember, Baraka followed a brand of black nationalism called Kawida. But I can remember when the poster came out that condensed Kawida down to the 3 cutting edges: black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and revolutionary socialism. And that was as early as 1972, I believe.
He was way ahead.
That's right. So he was way ahead, or maybe he was really in his time. Maybe we were behind and he was on point and we were trying to catch up to him.
In 1960, after Fidel moves into Havana, it was Amiri Baraka who, with a group of 350 or more black intellectuals, starts a Fair Play for Cuba committee. Who would have done that? And decried the blockade. He was the first one who said, let's bring together these communities. The man was into Sekou Touré. He was into Kwame Nkrumah. I hadn't read Sekou Touré's poetry. I had never read this. This guy brought an African socialist to our shores and had us meet him. So for a black Puerto Rican to sit and understand that a black intellectual was sitting down and discussing global socialism was, for me, mind-boggling. So he said, it's not enough to write the stuff. It's not enough to sit there and be an armchair liberal. That's why he loved Ginsburg so much, because Ginsburg was about doing stuff. Allen Ginsburg, forgive me. He said, and Ginsburg told me, this is the guy. After Whitman, after Robert Frost, after Ginsburg, there's Amiri Baraka.
I want to turn to a clip of Amiri Baraka. This is June 2004, the first National Hip-Hop Political Convention. It took place in Newark, New Jersey.
Just like Malcolm X told me the month before he died, And just like Martin Luther King told me the week before he died in my house, said what we must have, Brother Baraka, is a united front. We must build that united front, no matter whether you're the Panthers, the cultural nationalists, whether you believe in rap or whether you believe in hip-hop, whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or a vegetarian or you don't even know what you is. You understand what I'm saying? We have got to put that together first to do what? To beat Bush. That's the key link. But the overall theme has to be to fight for a people's democracy.
That was Amiri Baraka speaking June 2004. Sonia Sanchez, I want you to pick this up from here. It might surprise people to know, for all his radical politics, he was out there getting people to vote.
Oh, yes. Isn't that wonderful? And his son is running for mayor, and Brother Baraka would call people and say, hey, come help me, help us with this campaign. We did a fundraiser for him here in Philadelphia for Brother Raz. But talking about socialism and talking about communism, the left, I mean, one of the things that Brother Baraka told me is that how he really became very much involved with that was through Amina. Sister Amina began to question where they were with their politics. She began a very involved study in terms of communism. And he said, yeah, Brother Baraka's wife, Sister Amina, you know, and we began to understand that it was not just his movement by himself, but it was that move with the two of them, that movement with the two of them to begin to move towards the left. You know, Fanon said simply what is needed is to hold oneself like a sliver to the heart of the world, to interrupt, if necessary, the rhythm of the world, to upset, if necessary, the chain of command, but to stand up to the world. This brother, you know, stood up to the world. This brother stood up to the world, you know, because he said, I am doing battle for the creation of a human world. We must never forget that he was doing battle for a human world,
on that
as
note,
Fanon said.
At that note, we have to wrap up the show, but we won't wrap up the conversation. We'll continue it, and we'll put it online at democracynow.org. Sonia Sanchez, renowned writer, poet, playwright, and activist, thank you for joining us. Larry Hamm, chairman of the People's Organization for Progress. Kamosi Woodard, the author of A Nation Within a Nation, Amiri Baraka and Black Power Politics. Larry Hamm, chair of the People's Organization for Progress, and Felipe Luciano, poet activist. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily, independent, global grassroots news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org today. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.